Welcome back here to the channel. I'm Steve Deace with Aaron McIntyre. Time for week 2 of our confidence picks. Aaron, before we unveil this week's picks in the Big Ten, why don't you give us an update on how you and I did in week 1?
All right, so it looks pretty good for both of us. Got all of our 18 through 11 games. Those are all correct. Where it got a little bit interesting is in our 10 through 1 games. You got Purdue, Washington, Maryland, Indiana, and Penn State correct. You missed on Minnesota and LSU. You hit on Michigan State, UCLA, and Northwestern. I got everybody right except for Miami over Northwestern. So you lost 9 points, potential points. I lost 2. For a difference of 7 points, by the way, which will become relevant here in a moment. Our bonus picks, you got Fresno State plus 21.5 over Michigan. Despite the fact that I took UNC at minus 1.5 and that hit, I gave out UNC minus 2.5 and they only won by 2, so that missed. Again, this bonus pick is worth 7 points. There was a difference of 7 in our picks. You gained 7, and I didn't gain anything in our confidence picks, which means we finished week 1 tied.
And I mean, this was excruciatingly close last year, if I recall, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
All right, here's our picks.
So it's amazing with all that variance that it's still that close, but here we go.
Yep. Here's this week's picks.
All right, let's start off. There are 15 games in the Big Ten this week. 2 teams have byes. Maryland and Michigan State play a conference game. Ohio State and Western Michigan is going to be my 15-pointer this week. I'm going to put 14 on Minnesota over Rhode Island. That's more of a statement of Rhode Island than Minnesota. 13 on Penn State over Bowling Green, whom I think might be the best team in the MAC this year. Indiana with 12 over Western Illinois. Rutgers 11 over the Fighting Zips of Akron. I'm going to put 10 on USC over Utah State, 9 on Washington over Chris Creighton's Eastern Michigan Eagles, but they are road warriors, and we have seen them beat Big Ten teams on the road before. So that's why I'm only putting 9 points on that one.
I've got 15 on Ohio State as well, 14 on Penn State over Bowling Green, 13 USC over Utah State. Spencer Petras, actually. I think still the starting quarterback for Utah State, although he did get injured in their game last week. I've got 12 Oregon over Boise State. I really think that Dan Lanning, that's going to be come up a little bit later on. I really think Dan Lanning's going to use last week as a huge, big-time motivator for his team. Mm-hmm. At 11, I've got Washington over Eastern Michigan, 10 Rutgers over Akron, and 9 Minnesota over Rhode Island.
All right, my second panel of picks. I am going to go with Wisconsin with only 8 over South Dakota. I'm not really high on Wisconsin this year. I'm going to put only 7 on Oregon over Boise State. I don't think Boise State, they played at Autzen several times. I don't think they'll be intimidated. And I'm going to hedge on Oregon just because I don't know what to think of that game, like we talked about on Bigger Ten. It's one of the weirdest box scores to real-time results in a season-opening game I can ever remember. So I'm going to split the baby in half and stick with Oregon, but not put as many points on it. I'm going to put 6 on Texas over Michigan. I will tell you, though, just understanding the way the Michigan program operates pretty intimately. I liked this. I like the definitiveness of this a lot better when Texas was a 3 or 4 point favorite. You are still talking about a program that's very proud, that has won the last 3 Big Ten titles outright, and really was clearly the most dominant team in the league all 3 years, and is the reigning national champs. Michigan hasn't lost
a touchdown plus dog at home.
Yeah, you're talking about Michigan hasn't lost to a team not named Michigan State or Ohio State at home in like 10 years. And you're now more than a touchdown. You start wondering how much pressure that puts on Texas, but I'm going to go still with what I saw. But I will tell you that if it was 4, I would have had more than 6 points on Texas. I'm going to put 5 on Maryland over Michigan State. One of my favorite picks this week is Maryland minus 8 over Michigan State. It's just these other games I think are just from a straight up standpoint. I don't want to lay a lot of these big numbers, with these teams playing folks that they don't really care about the margin with. But and so that's why, as much as I like Maryland minus the points, I'm only putting 5 points on them. I'm going to put 4 on Nebraska. Kind of the same thing here. I think Nebraska is way better than Colorado. And if the spread was 3, 4, 5 points, I'd put more points on it. But you're putting a lot of pressure now by making this more than a touchdown. You're putting a lot of pressure on a program that has just lost this game over and over again for the last 8 years. This kind of game right here. So to me, I think this is either Nebraska rolls or Colorado wins. I don't think this is Nebraska holds on at the end. In fact, if it's close at the end, if I'm Nebraska, man, I'm looking down at my jersey. You know what I'm saying? And how are we going to blow it again this time? Yeah. I'm going to put 3 on Iowa over Iowa State. Because of what we talked about on Bigger Ten, I don't know what to make of all these Big Ten teams dominating FCS foes. From an Iowa State perspective, I'd be concerned about my top 2 linebackers being out against a team that features the tight end as its as the focal point of its offense. But I also think the Iowa State defense is very good, and this has been kind of a crazy series in the past. I'm going to go with Illinois over Kansas here. And I had this picked all preseason, and I was going to get weak in the knees. Now, this is where the point spread made me more confident the other way. The fact that Kansas is ranked and not even favored by, well, it might be a touchdown now. The opener was only 5 against an Illinois team that, didn't even make a bowl game a year ago. Illinois got routed last year on a Friday night in Lawrence, Kansas. And I think they've got this game circled, and I really don't think there's a massive talent disparity. I love Jaden Daniels at quarterback, when his back doesn't give out for Kansas. But I still think Illinois might be the overall more talented roster here. They just don't have a quarterback like that, or a tailback like Neal for Kansas as well. And then the line of the week that I don't get in the Big Ten, I don't, who is Duke to be favored by more than a field goal on the road against Northwestern? I mean, Northwestern... they were really never in danger of losing that game last week. There were a lot of people's upset pick, smart people like you. They were only favored by 3. They won by 10. I don't know. Duke's basically replacing an entire roster. I'm going to take Northwestern to pull the upset at home here against the Blue Devils.
Yeah, that was actually, that was a sneaky impressive win for Northwestern, because of what you just said. Yeah, it wasn't lighting up the scoreboard, but they were just in control, and good on them. I've got Indiana over Western Illinois. Western Illinois is not great. Maryland over Michigan State. I'm pretty confident on that one as well. I just did not. I can see what people see in Aiden Childs. There were some plays where it was like, wow, that guy is legit. And then there were some plays nearly should have been a pick 6 when they were driving down to really put the game away against FAU. So I think Michigan State still has some growing pains, and this is going to be their first conference game. Maryland has an established program now, unlike Michigan State. So I'm going with Maryland there. Wisconsin over South Dakota. That should be a snooze fest. Texas over Michigan. Again, this is going to show us what Michigan can be a lot more than last week did. If they show up and they have more than just a pulse, if they show that, hey, no, we're actually still legit, we are still the defending Big Ten and national champions, then, I think there's reason for optimism about, all of the goals still on the table, reaching the college football playoff. So that's going to be an instructive game for Wolverine fans. 4, I've got Nebraska over Colorado. I expect Nebraska to win, but I need to see it with my own eyes to believe it. Number 3, Kansas over Illinois. I just think, what was the phrase? You need to repeat this phrase more often. Now, Iowa has kind of shirked this, but in college football, what can't you hide?
Can't hide your quarterback in college football.
And it's not that Altmaier is bad, but I just think Daniels is much better. And so for that alone, I'm going with Kansas over Illinois. I would not bet Kansas point spread wise, but I would pick them just in straight up picks. 2, I'm going with Duke over Northwestern. Don't call me a hater, but I'm just fading Northwestern. Eventually, sometime this magical run, I think, has to run out of steam. And yeah, it's magical in terms of the circumstances. And number 1, I've got Iowa over Iowa State. Not confident in this at all, nor should I be. As you pointed out, this rivalry has taken some crazy twists and turns over the years. If I were Iowa State, you have the advantage at wide receiver. Iowa's secondary really hasn't been tested that much. Yeah, in the safety positions and in the nickel or the cash, they are really good. But in terms of their cornerbacks, they still need to be tested. And that's the big risk. I think Iowa State needs to go after those cornerbacks. That's a big risk because all of a sudden you could be looking at 2 or 3 straight 3-and-outs. But I think that's your probably best path to victory, or at least keeping it competitive in Iowa City. So that's going to be a really...
Did you watch the Iowa State last week at all in
I
their
watched
opener?
bits. Yeah, I watched bits and pieces. I was
Did
out.
you see what they did almost the whole game?
Throw it up.
Spread it out
Yep.
through the football.
Yep.
I mean, they barely ran the ball at all.
Yep.
It was very clear that I've never seen Matt Campbell run an offense like that. Not with Brock Purdy, not with anybody. It was like an air raid. They just spread the ball out and we're throwing, and we're not talking like a bunch of play action. It was a straight drop back. They're throwing it all over the yard. It was very clear they were working on the kind of game plan that you are describing right now.
So I think that's going to be a risk, but I think that's their path to victory, because if they can find some weak links, and there was John Nestor, a backup cornerback for Iowa. He lost on a jump ball last week, I think early on in the third quarter. So that could be an area of concern. I know Phil Parker really emphasized, and I thought it was maybe just that's his position, Iowa's defensive coordinator, during the BTN bus tour. He said he's got the most questions or something along those lines about the secondary. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. But this is going to be CBS's first game broadcast from Kinnick Stadium since 1985, number 1 versus number 2, Iowa versus Michigan.
Wow.
All right, here's our bonus picks. Bonus picks.
All right. So I mentioned earlier, I absolutely love Maryland -8 over Michigan State. So much it's my bonus pick. It's just if we're going to do straight up picks, I think the odds are better that Penn State's going to beat Bowling Green than Maryland is going to beat Michigan State. But I was very impressed with Maryland. A very impressive opener against UConn on both sides of the football. I just think they're just the level of program development here between Mike Locksley in year 4 and Jonathan Smith, who's basically in year 0, is leaps and bounds. And I just think Maryland's dramatically superior. I'm laying it.
Agree with that. I hate the number of points that we're laying here, but I'm a believer in Dan Lanning, and I think last week just set up perfectly. Boise State could be in the college football playoff. They really could be from the group of 5, what we're calling them now. I really think that Dan Lanning's going to have his team motivated and focused for this game. They kicked Idaho's butt on the stat sheet and everywhere except for the final score. I think they're going to be coming in to this game with their hair on fire, under the lights at Autzen Stadium. I think it'll be 7 o'clock, so it'll end up under the lights at Autzen. I think that this sets up really nicely for Oregon. So despite almost 3 touchdowns, I'm going Oregon -19.5 over what should be a pretty good, if not really good, Boise State team.
Well, we ended up tied after 18 games last week and a bonus pick. So find out what happens this Saturday with our Week 2 picks. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review here at the channel. Appreciate all of you doing that. We'll see you next week. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Dace. We'll see you here right then. Stay tuned.